Good evening, everyone. My name is Jenny Worley-Hemmeter, and I'm with Anderson's Bookshops. We'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us tonight to talk books with us. For those of you who are not familiar with our store, Anderson's is an independent bookstore outside of Chicago. We have been owned and run by the Anderson family for 6 generations now. Our store has a long history in our communities, and though COVID has taken a toll on everyone, your support and attendance tonight helps us to see the light at the end of this tunnel. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Please do visit our website, andersonsbookshop.com, or any of our social media pages to find our complete events calendar for the fall. There's so much coming up that we don't want you to miss. We do have tickets available now for Alka Joshi, Alice Feeney, and Kristen Hanna, among many others. So do please check that out at your leisure. Quick accessibility note, we have turned on the live transcript feature. So if you'd like subtitles or a full transcript as provided by Zoom, you can choose that using the live transcript or CC button at the bottom of your own screen. But tonight we are very happy to be celebrating the release of Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty. I'd like to welcome our moderator today and introduce Anderson's Bookshop's co-owner, Becky Anderson, as well as our virtually visiting author, Liane. Liane, of course, is the author of the #1 New York Times bestsellers, Big Little Lies, The Husband's Secret, and Truly Madly Guilty. Also, 9 Perfect Strangers, recently adapted for the small screen, What Alice Forgot and the Last Anniversary, The Hypnotist Love Story, and 3 Wishes. She lives in Sydney, Australia, where she's joining us from with her husband and 2 children. So hello to you both and welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hello, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
All right, well, I'll turn it over to you. Let's talk Apples Never Fall.
Okay. So Apples Never Fall. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this book, Liane. There was so much I could relate to in this. I think having 3 brothers and everything that went on growing up, and there was so much I could relate to in the relationships in this. But I just want to congratulate you on your 9th book out in the world. And I think that's absolutely fabulous. But also I wanted to thank you because I saw on your Facebook, you rang the bell a few days ago.
I did ring the bell. That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I want to congratulate you because I am also a breast cancer survivor, and it was great to ring that bell. And also to have some of the women who I've been through radiation with for weeks were there too. And it was something, you create a certain relationship with women like that when you go through that sort of experience. So I just want to congratulate you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Same to you then. It's I wasn't sure if I should go public with it, but I'm really glad that I did because of people like you and all the comments that came, and feeling like I was part of that community.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is a community. There's women I will never forget, and some I still keep in contact with that I met during that whole experience. So it was really something. So I know it's early morning for you. For here, it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and it is summertime. So tell us what time it is there and what season you're in as well.
So we're in spring, so I am a bit sneezy. And yes, it's morning. It's not that. It's not that early, really. It's 10 o'clock, so 10 o'clock in the morning on a beautiful spring day.
Yeah, well, here it's been warm, but we've got some great weather right now. So, so this book, Apples Never Fall. I just wanted to tell you, congrats. I've got a great Kirkus review, and I agreed exactly with the review because it talked about relationships and how families and what families mean, and how we all get something out of a family experience than our siblings or our parents or anyone else. But I think this book definitely I could relate to so much because it's so interesting how as a family, we view things so differently from one another. One sibling from another will look at one occasion or one happening and see it completely different. Somebody could see it as it was really fun. Someone could see it was dreadful. So it was so interesting how you get inside the heads of these characters. And so I thought it was absolutely brilliant reading this book. And I hated to turn the page, and we can't give away spoilers. So we're going to weave our way around the facts and talk about this story and the characters without giving away too much. So I wanted to know how much of this book is any of it autobiographical, because I know you are the oldest of 6 children, correct?
Yeah. Yes, I am. So 4 sisters and 1 brother.
1 brother. So I was just wondering how much of this is autobiographical, because you're thinking there's 2 sisters, 2 brothers, and parents, and tennis is the overplaying game that is sort of the underlying. We'll say tennis is a character in this book as well.
Tennis is, excuse me, tennis is did become a character, but no, there's not really much of the Moriartys in it. We did used to play tennis, but not in any way like the Delaney's. So tennis was really big in Australia in the 60s and the 70s. Now you ask the question, actually, you do realize little bits of yourself that come in. So for example, my father, who grew up very sort of working class background, but they did have a tennis court that they had built themselves in the backyard. So that was a very common thing, that because we have big blocks in Australia, so a lot of places had tennis courts. And so growing up, we would often go, if we went for a picnic somewhere, we'd try and find somewhere with a tennis court. So we'd play and just hit the ball about, but not in any competitive sense. So with the Delaney's, I originally, in fact, it wasn't meant to be a book about tennis at all. I had just thought to myself, I want to give them a business, their own business, so I can keep them all in one place, just for convenience purposes, really. Excuse my voice. This is spring. Sorry, audience. And so, yes, so I had thought to myself, I want to keep my characters all together, so I'll give them a family business. So then I was actually having a tennis lesson at the time when I came up with this idea. So I thought I'll make it a tennis school. And then as it evolved, I thought to myself, well, I guess if they run a tennis school, they're really into tennis. So then I'll have to research tennis, and then tennis then sort of drove the story. But I definitely didn't set out to write, and now I'm going to write a book about tennis.
Right. Because the story starts off, and without spoilers, but I can read the first line. So I know we can talk about Joy Delaney. So we can, yeah. I think we can say that she's the mother of this family. And she and her husband started the Delaney, this business of teaching kids, teaching people tennis. And they were quite good tennis players themselves. But the first, and I think your first lines of most of your books are so wonderful, and I'll ask you a question about that later. But the first, in the prologue, the bike lay on the side of the road beneath a gray oak, the handlebars at an odd jutted angle, as if it had been thrown with angry force. So you got us hooked immediately. So it starts off with a bike here, and we'll just say Joy is involved with that bike, but we don't know anything beyond that. So I want to know, where did the DNA, besides the tennis portion of this, came into the story? Where did the DNA or the seed start to grow for a story like this, where a woman disappears and her family and everything that happens around it comes out in the story?
Well, I have such a long answer to that question. Okay. So first of all, that very first scene that you described, my sister Jackie, who you have met, who is the author Liane Moriarty, I had decided to take a year off. So I actually, this book is a little later. Normally I have a book out every 2 years, and this is the 3rd year. And I was actually calling this year the Year of Joy. And I had decided that I would just do things because I've been working quite hard for a while, and I thought I'll listen to music and try and discover if I have a soul. And my sister Jackie, who I'm very close to, she actually sent me a CD with some music. She sent me some poetry, and I said to her, I want to write, but not write to a deadline. And I want to just I want to start writing, and I asked her to send me some writing prompts. And she actually sent me a prompt, which she just texted it to me, where she just described, not that exact line. I don't want to give Jackie credit for that first line that you just read out, but she did describe a bike lying on the grass with I don't think she said the number, but a bike lying on the grass with spilled apples next to it. So she basically wrote a prompt for the very first scene for the book. So that was one little seed. Another seed is that, like Joy Delaney, who I describe in that very opening chapter, she's wearing headphones, the fancy headphones that her husband had given her. My husband also gave me some fancy headphones, which got me into podcasts. And some of the first podcasts I listened to were true crime podcasts. And I know that's where I came up with this premise of what would happen if your father was the chief suspect in the murder of your mother. How would you feel? And then I thought, well, then it would be so interesting if you had multiple siblings, because some of you could feel one way, some another way, and you could have some factions there. And a third little strand, I also remember reading an article about an elderly couple who heard a knock on the door one night, and a woman said she was a domestic violence victim, knocked on their door, and they let her in. And there were things resulted from that, nothing to do with my story, but I was just intrigued by the idea of these people trying to help somebody, and then things went wrong for them.
So those are three, well, we won't describe those scenes and how they affect the story,
Yes.
that little bit. But I think, you're talking about, Stan and Joy Delaney live in the suburbs of Sydney, and they have this tennis school. But I love how complex the relationship was, starting with, they were both competitive, very good tennis players, but also we're seeing their lives. And the device that you use was going back and forth between now, what was happening now, real time in the story, and then that was what was happening in the past, maybe a year or two in the past. So I love that way you told the story of this family, these four siblings. It was Amy and Logan and Troy and Brooke, and the four siblings, and how they related to one another, but how they related to their parents. And I just thought it was so wonderful. Was that difficult to do? Because you get so inside your characters' heads. I'm just amazed, because you get to know these characters so well that you feel like you could start up a conversation if you ever met them on the street.
Well, that's the perfect thing to say. Thank you so much.
Yeah, right.
That's exactly the response that I want. So thank you.
Yeah. So is that difficult to do when when you have six characters that are so, important to the story, but really getting inside their heads and then interpreting how they view each other, how they feel about their father, how they feel about their mother, and just the whole situation. And they each and every one are flawed in their own way, just like we are in real life. So is that difficult to do, to really get inside someone's head?
I do find it difficult at the beginning of my book. So I don't plan my books at all from the point of view of the plot or the characters. So that's why I always miss the characters from my previous book. So when I started writing Apples Never Fall, I missed all my 9 Perfect Strangers from my previous book, because by writing them, I get to know them. And so I just sort of play around with them in the beginning, and that as I'm writing, they feel a little bit awkward. So I can't make them move. And I'm just thinking, oh, maybe they're this sort of person, maybe they're that sort of person. And then as I get into the story, they start to move for me. So then I often go back to the early chapters, because then I think, oh, now I know Joy now. So now she wouldn't say this, and I have little conversational quirks for them. So I'll go back and change that. So it's hard in the beginning, but then somehow just by, I'm not sure how, it just seems to happen that they start to come to life. I know in one way you take little bits of yourself, you take little bits of people, and I know some authors talk about that all just sort of flows through them. I don't feel that it happens that way, but there is a tiny bit of magic that somehow they start to, then now it's Joy. It's no longer just this attribute of mine and this attribute of my mother's, for example. Now it's purely Joy.
Right. And with
it's purely Joy as well. Sorry. It's
right,
Joy.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, with the 4 children, I found them so fascinating. They're all grown. They all had different relationships with their parents, and how tennis played such a huge role in their life, but it really was the vehicle from what they learned from the parents and how they developed and into adulthood, how this vehicle of tennis was the family business. And I know what that's like to be in a family business. And and how it truly affects your relationships with your parents, with your siblings, all of that. So that's why this book, I don't think I've read a book about siblings and the relationships that I could really relate to, because there was so much, and there was the humor and the laughter they had with one another. And that's the other thing that I think is so incredible about your books, is how much humor, because you know, something could be really dark or scary or frightening, but you add some wit and into it, and it just makes it seem so much more real. So how important is humor as well to your writing?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm so happy that you say that about the business side of it, because again, because I don't plan it by just thinking, okay, they run a family business, but then when you start thinking about it, then you think, well, how would that be if your parents, which is not something I had experienced, how would that be if that was such a big part of your life? And then I had the tennis court in the backyard, so that's their business. It would obviously infiltrate everything. And then just through research, by talking to people, then there are little things. So I talked to somebody whose parents had run a tennis school, and he talked about the hard work of preparing the court. So there are all little things like that that you can put in. In regard to the humor, I definitely don't, again, ever make a point to say I'm going to write a funny book, or I just let it. It's just the way I write. And I know some people don't like too much humor when you're dealing with tragedy. So I think that's just something I'm aware of at the end. Have I balanced it correctly? Will the reader feel that this is too trite? And so sometimes I will go back, or my editors will say, oh, you went a bit too far there, you've got to pull it back. So I become aware of the reader response once I'm looking back at it.
Yeah, well, I think it was pitch perfect at the end, I'll just say. What you got. But with the title, and that, I kept thinking, there's a reference on the first page of the book that references the 4 green apples that have supposedly, apparently have fallen out of the basket of the fallen bicycle. And the apples never fall. And to me, that seemed very similar, because I'm one of 4 siblings. And so I was relating this to, and how we all stayed in the same city, the same town, our whole lives. We're all working the business. We were all affected by it. And, so it's, always say that, the apple never falls far from the tree, but you kept them on the tree. So tell us about the significance of the title. And I love the cover. And I want to know too, do you have any say on what happens to the cover of your books?
Yes. So the title, trying to think. Oh, yes, I know. I normally, with my title, each day when I sit down to write, I like to start with a title. So the title for this originally was called The Year of Joy, because I was writing it in that year of joy. And that's why I had called the main character Joy Delaney. So I think Apples Never Fall came a little bit later. And again, it suddenly came to me, and I thought that worked really well with that scene with the apples. And so I kept that for quite a time. But then often your editors will disagree with your title. So I was just desperately hoping that they would like it, which they did, thank goodness. In regard to covers, the way it normally works is that the publisher will send you the cover and say, here's the new cover. We love it. We hope you do too. So they really just want you to love it. If you hate it, obviously you would have some say. And so I have different covers. So each of your publishers in your different territories, they have their own ideas. So it's always interesting to see how differently they interpret the book. Everybody for this one has had a tree so far. Yeah. Not necessarily something to do with apples. I thought they'd all do something with apples. And actually I was pretty happy with what they'd all done. I'm conscious of certain things. So for example, I never want my books to look too much like thrillers, because I don't think my books are thrilling enough to really be described as thrillers. And I never want the reader to be, flipping the pages thinking, when is the really thrilling part about to start?
Yeah, sure.
So that's the only thing I'm aware of. Will the reader be disappointed? Is it correctly conveying the tone of the book?
Yeah. And it definitely did for me. And it intrigued me just looking at the cover before I started it. So it made total sense to me as I got further into the book. So, Stan Delaney, Joy's husband, I really love the way you did the backstory on both of them, both Joy and Stan, about their childhoods, their parents, and what happened to them and how it influences them. So I just saw this generational thing as you see with families, things getting passed on. And I thought that was fascinating because then it sort of makes sense. And when you look at your own family, you can see how things make sense in the way you're raised, or the way the personalities or the inner demons or not of your own relatives, whether it's your parents or grandparents. So I thought that was wonderful. And I think too, you make families not look perfect. We all have our issues, our problems, but without spoilers, in the end, things will work out okay. So I just want to know if that's how you feel, even in your own family, and having two siblings that are also writers, that sibling rivalry in those relationships and those ups and downs that you have in families. How do you feel about your family and how it relates to this book?
I don't know that it really does. It just, we always say, so three out of the 6 children are authors, and we asked a lot, is there any rivalry? And our answer, which is a truthful answer, is that the only rivalry is in regard to family stories, so to anecdotes. So if there is any anecdote that any of us want to use in a book, you have to be very fast to put your hand up and say, I want that. And if my mother is ever on the phone to me and she starts telling a story, I have often said, I need to stop you right there, Mum. I want this story. Don't you tell the other girls this one, because this is too good. And because we all have lived relatively similar lives, there is a tendency, you automatically start to draw upon family material. So that's the only, there are little stories. I do remember reading my sister Nicola's first book and thinking I was going to use that one day. So little stories from our past. But that honestly is the only rivalry. But with this book, with them all playing tennis, being competitive sports people, it just seemed to make sense to really lean into the rivalry. I needed there to be rivalry so that there could be conflict. That's what makes a good story.
Right. Well, and it's so, when you write about the siblings and the way they sort of blame each other for supporting one parent or another, and without giving more spoilers, but it could tell you where their loyalties lie, but also their loyalties lie with each other. But even though they love each other and they tease each other and they argue with each other and they compliment or they insult each other, what the underlying thing is, that they really love each other. So it was so real. It's so typical, of what so many families are. When I thought of advice, when you went back and forth between now and then you went back to this just in the near distant past to tell the story. Do you outline, when you set out to write a book, do you outline what's going to happen? And how do you keep something like that straight? Or do you write the story and it sort of develops as you write and it surprises us as the reader in the same way?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an outliner. So in this case, as I said, I just had that little prompt for that very first scene. I liked the idea of of a mother going missing and the father being the chief suspect, but I didn't know where she was. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know when I very first started writing, I didn't know that they played tennis. I didn't know that tennis would become a part of the book. So I had no idea of how it all came together. And I don't like to give the impression that somehow I make it all, it just naturally falls into place. It doesn't at all. So because it's a scary way to write, because you're thinking to yourself, I hope something happens. I hope I work out where is she? She's disappeared. Where is she? So I'm constantly worrying myself. I don't know where she is. And there's such a pleasure in that when little ideas come to you, and I think maybe she's here, maybe this has happened. And I always have a separate document then that's called things I need to fix. So as I work it out, I can then go back and think, well, I'm going to need to signpost this, or this will no longer work now because now I know what's happened. I'll have to change that. So I'm just going back and forth and making all the pieces fit together. And because I did take longer with this book, which I'm really glad I did, there were little things. I had more time. I had more time for a little bit more of a complicated plot, and things came up, little things that I didn't think were relevant. Then I thought, oh, that could mean this. And then it allowed it to flow really organically in the story. So that for me is part of the pleasure in writing. When I sit down to write, I think, I wonder what's going to happen today. So it's part of the terror of writing, because I hope something happens today, but also part of the pleasure when I think, there's that bike lying on the ground, I wonder what it all means. And it's also why when I've often been asked, would you want to write the adaptation of your own books for the screen? And I actually hate that idea so much because I know what's going to happen. So it makes me want to cry with boredom at the thought of sitting there and rewriting out my own book for another medium, because that's the joy.
Yeah. I love it when authors answer the question and they say because I guess it's sort of that thrill when you're reading a book or something emotional or something happens and you discovered it in the same way that we are when we read it. I love that answer. And I know you plant a lot of crumbs. And like you say, you go back to plant a crumb or to drop the crumb like Hansel and Gretel and these little crumbs. And then these twists that happen. So I think that's just amazing. You go back then and just fit the pieces together. So I love it when authors answer that. And I think outlining is great. But this I find so exciting. I can see how scary it could be when you don't know what's going to happen either. So,
yes, yeah. I do know some authors prefer to have it all planned out before they start. And I know with my children, sometimes the teachers say to them, you have to have a plan before you write a story. You must have it all planned out. And my children think to themselves, well, my mum doesn't plan out her stories. So I understand why the teachers are saying that. It's a teacherly thing to say, but I think they should also sometimes let them just write and see what happens.
Right. And see, as they say, organically grow into the story. Yeah, right. On the flip side, we talked about humor and putting, those normal things that occur with people and how they laugh and just a normal way of life. That's what happens to us every day. But on the flip side, you do put in those darker sides of things. And I know some of your books have described that sort of noir sense that you put into some of your books. I think that's important as well. So tell us a little bit about that side of your writing, because I think there has to be the yin and yang of both in any good story.
Yes, there does. And as I said earlier, it's balancing those two parts. I think my books took a darker turn with The Husband's Secret, which was my 5th novel. And that was just the premise, which was, and I remember just thinking of that premise, what would you do if you'd found this letter from your husband to be opened in the event of his death, but he was still very much alive? Would you open the letter? And I remember taking that darker turn and thinking, can I carry this off? Because I didn't really consider myself, I'd never had any desire to write crime novels. And I'd just written family dramas. And so I think I came at it very much from that angle of ordinary life is going along. And of course, every time these crimes happen, they happen to ordinary people who never really believed anything like this could happen to them. So, because you think when you watch a movie or even when you read a crime book, if it's never really touched you, you really don't think it could happen to you. And because I wasn't that sort of writer, I think I wrote in that sort of way that quite believe this is happening. And each time I almost feel a sense of resistance, thinking I don't want these terrible things to happen to them. So I'm feeling the resistance of my characters as I write. But readers responded to The Husband's Secret more than they had to previous novels. And I do remember my editor at the time sending me an email, which she didn't say it exactly like this, but the message of the email was, do that again. Meaning, so, that worked. And she would never prescribe exactly what I should write about. But then it happened with Big Little Lies that that book flowed really really well. But I don't want to ever feel that I have to make terrible things happen with every book. Then my favorite author is Anne Tyler. And often in her books, not all that much necessarily happens. It's so character driven. So I have always said that my goal is to write as well as Anne Tyler, so I don't have to have big twists and turns happen. I can just write.
Right. Yeah. And she does have wonderful characters, that is for certain. One of the things I've noticed in some of your books, when you think about, in this one too, you take away some nuggets of good information or good feelings that when you look at a relationship of a marriage, or you look at a relationship of your siblings, or whatever it is, you take some nuggets away that, I think I need to maybe do some self-reflection for myself about my life, or how I've led my life, or how my relationship, maybe I need to do something to improve it. I know you don't do that consciously, but I'm sure you hear from readers that they're getting those kinds of feelings from your books, or some of that self-reflection. Do you hear that from your readers?
I do sometimes. Readers say wonderful, make some wonderful comments. So, for example, with What Alice Forgot, which is there's no crime in What Alice Forgot, but it's a woman who loses 10 years of her memory. So she believes she's back at the beginning of her marriage. And that, I know, really resonated with a lot of women in their 40s who then looked back at how they would feel, if their 30-year-old self could see their 40-year-old self, and their marriage in particular. So it was really amazing to me how many women said to me that they'd had really in-depth conversations with their husbands as a result of reading that book. Right. So that meant a lot to me. Yeah. But in a way, I love it, but I can't think about it too much when I sit down to write a new book, because I can't think, now I must be wise.
Right. Well, it wouldn't turn out in the end anyway if you did it on purpose.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. So you have over 20 million books in print now, and I know probably in multiple languages. But I'm thinking about, you've lived in Australia your whole life, and do you see a difference between an Australian reader and what they read and read your book, or an American reader or a Canadian reader? Do you see any difference, or the story is the story? There may be a few words that are more colloquial to Australia than the United States, but do you see any difference, or the comments that readers make? Do you see any difference between countries?
Well, first of all, I do get a lot of comments from people saying, they can't, especially I remember with Big Little Lies, that they can't. I had people saying to me, I can't believe here I am on the other side of the world, and I can't believe that my as a school parent, my life experiences are so similar to people on the other side of the world. But also, having said that, I did start selling. My book started selling in the US before they started selling as well in Australia, and I think part of that was that perhaps my book seemed a tiny bit exotic to American readers, but still relatable, and perhaps they enjoyed the Australian setting, whereas Australian readers perhaps would prefer, in the same way that I love reading Ann Tyler books. I love the fact that most of her books are set in Baltimore. I think they might all be. I love that it seems, again, a tiny bit exotic to me. And I do think in Australia we do tend to, or especially years ago, I think we're changing in this regard, but we used to have something called the cultural cringe, where we would feel that that if it was set in Australia, that was somehow inferior to some other parts of the world. So I can clearly remember a girlfriend saying to me when she read my very first novel over 20 years ago, and she literally used the word cringe. She said, I cringed a little bit with the Australian place names, as if you shouldn't, fiction, and because of, we watch American movies and we read so many books set in other parts of the world, as if a story can't take place in somewhere where you might have walked down that street. How embarrassing. Yeah. So I think that's something we're aware of, that, and especially being ordinary suburbia. So it would be okay to set a book in an iconic Australian settings, such as the Outback, but in a situation which, you could really relate to, that really would be this, the shopping centre that you went to. She was saying that people wouldn't know that particular shop. And I was thinking, but I'd read, from reading books set in other parts of the world, I know the names that that other readers, that other cultures use to refer. Why not use Australian terms? And that has definitely, in the last 20 years, that's changed.
Yeah. And I think it's, we obviously don't feel any type of, we love reading about Australia, but even a book like this, Apples Never Fall, it could be set in anywhere in the United States in suburbia. It really could.
Yes.
And
yeah, of course.
There's very little. And when you think about Big Little Lies, when it was made for the HBO series, it was set in the United States. So it yes. translated perfectly,
And it translated perfectly. And yes, as I say, really my books could take place anywhere, because the fact is that most of us are leading ordinary suburban lives in the Western world.
Yeah, many of us are. That is so true. I wanted to ask you about your sisters, the other two writers in the family. Do they ever read your manuscripts? Do you guys ever edit each other or give each other opinions, or sort of being your first readers, anything like that?
Yes, I think we're each other's first readers, but often the job that we ask each other to perform is really to read each other's manuscripts just as we're about to deliver, to read them really quickly and to immediately send a text saying, this is a masterpiece. You have nothing to worry about. I loved it, because there's just the agony of waiting for a response. So particularly my sister Jackie is very, she's so good at reading it really quickly for you, because you're just in such a state once you finish something. So all three of us now, we depend on our editors a lot. There may be something, if we're having difficulties with something, we might ask each other for advice, or we might, if our editors have asked for something which we disagree with, we might ask each other, what do you think? Have they got a point there? Or should I argue on this? Yeah. So, but it's not so much, we definitely don't read each other's very first drafts. We're not like a little writing group.
Right. Yeah. So it's great to have first readers that say it's a masterpiece. That's a sibling for you.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about your first published work. You got $1 advance for it, and it was called The Mystery of Dead Man's Island. So tell us about who gave you that $1 advance and what the story was about, and where your love of writing actually began.
Yes, so that was my father. So my father used to commission both myself and my sister Jackie when he discovered that we liked writing. He was very much of the opinion that there's nothing better than to be paid to do what you love. And he was a self-made entrepreneurial businessman. So to him, it was natural to say, well, I will commission you to write a book for me, which as a little girl just made me feel so, that felt so serious and important. And I can remember working so hard on that book, which was, as you say, was called. Yes, so I was just going to say that you could see when you look back and see The Secret of Dead Man's Island, you can see that I was clearly influenced by Enid Blyton because my characters sound suspiciously English. So they don't have Australian, they're saying things like, oh, what a jolly good idea. And there's talk of smugglers. So and I'm sure as a little girl, I had no idea what they were actually smuggling. But that was all thanks to Dad, who for many years would take full credit for our writing success.
I bet he did, very proudly, yeah. So I know you got a degree in business, but then you got your master's in creative writing. But before you did that, you worked as you were in marketing and publicity, and you were a copywriter. And it's so interesting to see, previous jobs before people start to really write in earnest, and wondering how those experiences have influenced your writing now, and if any of it still is influencing you.
I often I wonder how it influenced me because I had planned to go into journalism, and I often, if I had a regret, I would think, well, you should have gone into journalism because then you'd have so much more material to call upon, and I think it could have been good for me. But anyway, there's no point regretting that. I went into advertising, and at the time, especially because I had a bit of my father in me, I enjoyed the business side of it. I enjoyed writing creatively, but with a business objective. So trying to come up with creative ways to give people a rational reason for making an irrational choice to buy a product. I actually really enjoyed that. The only thing I think that it may have influenced me was that perhaps it made me more of a commercial writer, because nobody wants to read advertising copy. So you have to keep it concise, you have to keep it punchy, you have to lead people on to the next sentence. So perhaps that was the influence that made me a punchier, more commercial writer.
I know your editor in the United States is Amy Einhorn, which we've known her for years. She's a good friend of Anderson's. But how does it work when you have an editor in the United States and you also have an editor in Australia? Or is one or the other editing any particular book that you write?
Yes, so I have an editor. I have Amy in the US. I have 3 long-time editors who I've had nearly from the beginning of my career, an Australian editor and also an editor in London. So all 3 of them, thankfully these days, now edit together. So they work together for me, which I'm so incredibly grateful for, because in earlier years I would sometimes do different editing for depending on my books. So for example, Amy, with What Alice Forgot, that Alice is doing a step class in the Australian edition, and I remember Amy saying to me, nobody does step classes anymore, you have to change that. And I remember thinking, I'm still doing step classes. So Alice in the American edition of What Alice Forgot, she does a spin class and falls and hits her head. But that does sometimes, because we are such an international world, that would sometimes mean that book club members would be reading slightly different versions of the books, and they'd have their book club meeting, and there would suddenly be confusion, because they'd be thinking, but this happened, and then it would come out, they'd all think they were going crazy. So that doesn't happen anymore, thank goodness. There's really only the one book, with some slight changes for American spelling, or so, for example, or little things which wouldn't make sense to American readers. So we say the boot of the car, you say the trunk of the car. So little things like that, which would really trip up the reader. I make changes like that. So the 3 editors work together, which is wonderful, because it means if all 3 editors make a particular point, then I always think, well, that's clear. If there's 3 such different people, if they agree on this, I absolutely need to change it. There are other times that they disagree, and that's where, that's when then I need to just think about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting, though, working with 3 different ones in 3 different countries. Was talking about Big Little Lies, and as it was on HBO as a series, there's another one coming out of 9 Perfect Strangers. So tell us a little bit about that. And Nicole Kidman is starring in this one as well. So yeah.
She is in a very different character to Celeste in Big Little Lies. So she plays the charismatic, somewhat frightening but very well-meaning director of a health resort where the 9 strangers go to with the aim of changing their lives under Masha's rather unconventional care. And they filmed it here in Australia during COVID, which was fortunate that they were able to do that. And it's very different from Big Little Lies. There are some twists. So 9 Perfect Strangers didn't have some of the twists and turns of Big Little Lies. So there are more twists in the actual series than there were in the books. So that's definitely my characters, but some of the plot is quite different. So I like to say, I think if you love the book, you'll love the series. But if you didn't love the book, I think you'll also love the series too. Fine.
And I hear Melissa McCarthy is in it playing Frances, so that should be.
She is, and I asked for Melissa. She's gorgeous and couldn't be more perfect for Frances.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so a little sneak of anything you're writing now, or you're giving yourself a break after this?
I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing. The only thing I thought, I'm giving myself a break, especially after ringing the bell, and also doing this sort of thing. It's a different part of your brain. So I'm forming as a writer rather than being a writer. You know, the point of being a writer is to lose your sense of self. So I'm far too aware of my sense of self. I couldn't now, and the fact that I now talk about how I write, I couldn't now go and write, because then I'd think, oh, look at me, here I am not planning my book. So I need to, once even though obviously I enjoy talking to you, and I would love it if there were real readers here that I could be seeing face to face. So once that's all done, then I will probably ask my sister Jackie ask her to text me another writing prompt and see if that works.
Okay. Well, well-deserved break. But we hope the next time, the next book, you were able to do it in person. You come back and see us instead of doing it virtually. I hope
so. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I really hope so.
Well, so I do a little teeny quiz. I've interviewed many authors over the years. So this is a lightning round. So whatever comes to mind right away, let's let it be your answer. But this is all about your reading life. So, okay. So this is easy. You know these answers. So what was your favorite book as a child?
The Faraway Tree by Enid Blyton.
Okay, do you remember a favorite book at university, or maybe when you were working on your master's degree? Something that really influenced you or stayed with you?
I remember probably around that time was The Time Traveler's Wife. I absolutely love that book, but I haven't ever been able to pull anything like that off. I just love time travel as a concept, and I thought that was a wonderful book.
Yeah, I do too. I love anything with time travel. Okay, how about a book that you wish you had written?
The Accidental Tourist by Anne Tyler. That's the book. Amy actually got me a signed first edition of The Accidental Tourist. So it's sitting. You can't. It's off camera, but I always say I would save it in a fire.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, how about have you ever bought a book for its cover? And what book was it?
I can't remember. I couldn't remember that. No, oh, I'm looking. I'm sorry, I can't remember.
That's okay.
It's a particular type of quirky, whimsical cover that I've never had for my own books, but that really appeals to me, and I often buy that sort of book.
Okay. Okay. How about if you could have a dinner, it would be 4 people, including yourself. You could choose 3 authors, any authors throughout time. Who would those 3 guests be for your dinner?
I would have any throughout time.
Oh yeah, could be dead or alive.
Oh,
I know this makes the whole
it does. Yeah. And I would probably go. I'll probably change my answer if I go back and think about it as to who would be entertaining and interesting. But I automatically go to more contemporary authors. I mean, I'm friends with Marion Keyes. I love Marion because she's so funny and gorgeous. I'm friends with Jojo Moyes. That's silly to say because I could have dinner with them anyway. So I'd love to meet Anne Tyler. Carol Shields was an author who I adored, who sometimes there's a particular Republic of Love. There's a particular scene in that book where I can, if I was an actress and I needed to cry on at a point, I would just need to turn to this particular page in this book and start reading this scene, and I can immediately start sobbing just from that particular page. Stephen King would be fun. I don't know. I would be that will Stephen, Anne, and Carol.
Yeah. Oh, that would be an interesting conversation. Yeah, very nice. Okay. Do you remember the last book you gave as a gift?
Have I given a book I read recently, which I absolutely adored? In fact, I've adored all her books. Is that now? You'll know I've gone blank on her. Mary Lawson, the town called Solace. Mary. I love her.
Yeah, I need to look at it too.
A Crow Lake.
I think it's
Mary Lawson is her name.
Mary Lawson. Is it?
Mary Lawson. I think Mary Lawson.
Thanks,
she could be my next Anne Tyler. I think.
Okay.
Beautiful. So I think I gave. I think it was called A Town Called Solace.
Okay. How about a book you read to your 2 kids when they were younger? Something you read aloud that you loved, or maybe something you read over and over again.
Yeah, there was a little book that I read, which in fact Jackie, my sister, recommended to me that she read to her little boy, which used to make him laugh, and it was called One Hat, Two Hat, Three Hat. Oops, it's not called that. That's the first page of it. I think it's called Red Hat. Sandra Boynton. Yep.
Boynton.
Yep.
Yes, right.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And I can remember holding off reading it to my little boy because I wanted to see if it would make him laugh. And I think it was about 18 months. And I will never forget him sitting on my lap. And it's the rhythm of the words with the 1 hat, 2 hat, 3 hat, oops, such and such, such and such, oops. And then there's this little chuckle. And then by the end of it, he was just laughing so hysterically. It's the best book to read. Yeah. And to feel him responding to a story, and exactly the same thing happened with my little girl.
Yeah, and her books are just the best for that. Just the best.
Yes.
Yeah, they're so full of joy. That's what they are.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what are you reading now? What's on your nightstand right now?
I'm reading. What have I read that I loved? I've got a whole pile of advanced reader copies. Oh, I should have been ready for this question. because I must admit I've been going through a bad time with reading, with, you know, when you sometimes go through the doom scrolling and you're just looking at your phone too much. Actually, the truth is I've been reading The Hobbit because my son is doing it for school. So that's the truth. Why not tell the truth? That's what I've been.
Well, that's great. And that's a book worth reading again and again and again. Absolutely.
It is. Yeah. And I actually in my memory, it wasn't as funny as it was. I've forgotten. It's really funny. I don't know that my son's seeing the humor so much. I'm saying it's so funny, isn't it? And he's saying,
tell him to read it another 20 years. And then
exactly.
Right,
So yes, I think I thought of that as a question I needed to have some better answer. That's the truth. That's what I'm reading.
No, and that's a great one. Well, A+, 100%. So thank you for taking the quiz. And thank you so much, Liane. It's been so much fun. And I can't wait till everyone gets their hands on this book and read it. They will absolutely love it and find so much that's so relatable, but such a great story.
Oh, thank you so much, Becky. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Yeah,
well, thank you to you both for your time today so that we could have this fantastic conversation. It's always great to listen to people who know books talk about books that they love and things that are upcoming. So we appreciate that. Thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening. We're really glad that you could be here with us as well. And just to let you know, you'll all get an email from our ticketing platform event combo, which will let you know when your book is ready to either pick up or has shipped to you. So thank you so much. Of course, Liane, yes, to echo Becky, we can't wait until travel makes sense again and we can maybe welcome you in person to Anderson's Bookshops for whatever your next book becomes. But thank you both very much. Be safe to both of you and happy reading, everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.